Britain has undergone a huge change in the last few years. Since 9/11, the state has developed a very different view of its citizens. New surveillance technologies are penetrating every aspect of our lives, and we don't even know it. Across the country, millions of cameras are watching us. The police will soon be able to record every journey we make.
Your vehicle has insurance.
Is that address?
Yes, yes.
And soon the state will want all our fingerprints and iris scans.
Please look into the mirror.
The Information Commissioner recently released a report on the surveillance society of today, but there is much more to come in the future.
Basically, it's a first-and-only microchip to implant in humans.
It's like my barcode.
Exactly.
The government says we need all this new technology to fight 21st century crime and terrorism. But far from making life safer, it could actually help those we fear most.
Here's a new passport. That's the actual chip that will have your data stored on it.
Yeah.
Full name, date of birth,
Yes.
nationality and so on. I've written some software that will actually try and read it.
It's unbelievable.
The state now has powers to probe and pry into our lives that the dictatorships of the past couldn't have dreamt of. A profound change is taking place, and we should all be worried that we are sleepwalking into a society where 24-hour surveillance of everyone is the norm.
I recently accepted an offer to engage in an email correspondence about surveillance and civil liberties with Tony Blair, which was published in the Observer newspaper. The Prime Minister dismissed concerns about civil liberties, arguing the increased dangers posed by crime and terrorism justified the government's approach. He wrote, "We are trying to fight 21st century crime by 19th century means. It hasn't worked. It won't work. The terrorism is different. The street crime is different." In this program, I want to find out more about the actual technology of surveillance. What is already in use, how it is being used, and what is planned for the future. And most importantly, what the consequences are for us, the citizens of this democracy. And this is where it starts.
This is one of 4 million CCTV cameras in Britain. That's more than anywhere else in Europe. In the last 15 years, Britain has become the CCTV capital of the world.
There's no doubt that cameras can deal with some crime effectively. For instance, they significantly reduce crime in car parks, which is one of the reasons the current government spent £170 million on CCTV when it came to power. Today, they are everywhere. On the street, in shops, in restaurants and bars, even on buses and taxis. And the footage is normally held for 30 days.
I just did a little experiment. I walked from this concourse down through the station, down to the gents' loo, and counted 31 cameras.
Professor Clive Norris estimates that people in London are filmed an average of 300 times a day.
What we've moved away from is this idea, in a sense, that you should only target those that you have reasonable suspicion of, and we've moved to a point where we're saying everybody is suspicious and we have a right to target everybody. It's a fundamental change in our society when everyone becomes a suspect, doesn't it? I think this is the major drift in the last 15 years. When we talk about the move to the risk society, what it actually means is we are all a risk, therefore we must all be monitored.
Not just monitored, but judged. London Underground has recently been testing out some remarkable new software created by a British company called Ipsotech, which will analyze CCTV footage. Using a pre-programmed profile, the software will decide if what the camera is seeing is normal or abnormal. The makers claim it will identify potential criminals by their behavior. For example, if someone is standing near a cash machine but not using it, the software will alert the CCTV operator. Perhaps it's time for us to start practicing our normal behaviour. In response to the increase in surveillance, the government has introduced laws intended to give us greater access to our personal data, including CCTV footage. Heather Brooke is a journalist specialising in data protection law and the Freedom of Information Act. She believes that in practice these laws are failing to deliver what they promise.
It's a one-way system where they're demanding all this information from us, and yet on the other hand they're not giving it back.
But what would, I mean, you know, I would say this to people, and I've often written this sort of thing, and people tend to say, but what can I do? This is the way life is, this is the way technology is, and there's nothing I can do, I can't protest. What can they do?
I guess the simplest thing they could do is use their right to ask for the footage.
Yeah.
And
how do they do that, actually?
What they do is they make a request, it's called a subject access request,
yes.
And you use the Data Protection Act,
yes.
And you ask the authority who owns the camera for the footage of you.
Yes.
We decided to put these Freedom of Information laws to the test. There are hundreds of cameras around the Houses of Parliament and Ministry of Defence. Well, it's one of the most important and sensitive areas in Britain, so the high security is to be expected.
Was it actually for?
This is Channel 4.
Channel 4, was
Yeah.
it a documentary or?
Yes,
Okay,
yeah.
That's all I wanted to know, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Then I stood outside a bank for a few minutes being watched. I can understand the reasons for them needing security as well. Just around the corner is a football association. Even they have cameras that film anyone who passes. It's difficult to imagine why they feel they need cameras anywhere but on the pitch. And what's happening to all this material? How long is it stored? How can it be used? Heather prepared letters filed under the Data Protection Act, requesting access to some of the footage. I'll soon find out whether the promise of the Data Protection Act is fulfilled in practice or not. In the last few years, software has been available to allow computers to read car number plates. This automatic number plate recognition technology is used in speed cameras and on a huge scale to enforce a congestion charge in London.
Go ahead. Number. Bravo Uniform 04 Tango Zulu Golf. Your vehicle has insurance. At that address? Yes, yes.
Now it's been developed further and has been linked to the vast police national computer database. Here in South London, it's been used to track every vehicle that passes, up to 60 cars a minute. The number plates are instantaneously checked against the national computer for theft, insurance irregularities, unpaid fines, or suspected criminal activity. Patrols a few hundred meters away are waiting to pick up the suspects. 23 police forces across England and Wales are now using this technology in high crime areas.
What's a big impact for you?
In that time, essentially for us, it's about denying criminals the use of the roads and increasing road safety. And so the kind of vehicles that we capture will be involved in crime, general crime. So we have caught people who are wanted for murder, people who are involved in serious crime, people who have got weapons and firearms within their vehicle.
But the police have far greater plans for this technology.
One of the troubling things about this new surveillance society of ours is something known as function creep. A piece of technology is brought in for one reason, but then used for far more.
London's congestion charge system has 700 cameras which use number plate recognition. It is designed to charge people who drive into the centre of town during peak times. But, in an example of function creep, the police want to link these existing cameras with the police national computer. And it isn't just London. A reported 3,000 cameras are currently being installed in a nationwide rollout of number plate recognition systems. And they won't just be monitoring criminals. The system will log the time, date and location of every car which passes its cameras. A national computer centre will scan up to 35 million number plates every day and keep the information for 2 years. And the police want to extend that to 5.
One of the really astonishing things is that despite the serious implications for privacy and individual liberty, these measures were never debated in Parliament.
We were waiting for a response to our request for CCTV footage. But I also want to know more about the cameras used in London for the congestion charge.
I've got 2 more requests that should be coming through at the end of this week. The one about the congestion charge cameras.
I'm very interested in that.
Yeah, when
Now these are the cameras which, when the congestion charge is not in operation, they're still filming and collecting your number plate. Why are they doing that?
I have no idea. I've asked them for the hours of operation, and then I've asked if these are operating out of the congestion charge time period. Why? What's the policy on why they're running? And what's done with that data as well?
Yeah.
What's the purpose of collecting that data?
So we're checked on the roads and watched on the streets. What about the tube? Transport for London has been very active in promoting Oyster cards. And why not? They're convenient, easy to use, and if you have one, you get a 50% discount.
Or is it the case that you get penalised if you don't have one? You may not know this, but having an Oyster card gives London Transport a complete record of every single journey you make.
Every trip you've taken in the last 8 weeks has been recorded in a database. The time, the start and finish points, all linked directly to your name and address. So now, there can be a record of your movements as you walk, drive and travel on the tube. Whatever next.
Please look into the mirror. Please move back a little.
From 2009, we will need to have our biometric data recorded if we want one of the Prime Minister's ID cards. He says they will be key in fighting everything from terrorism to illegal immigration.
Please look into the mirror. Please look into the mirror.
The government is planning to spend at least £5.4 billion on the most comprehensive database of personal information ever created by a government, the National Identity Register. To get a card, you will need to submit 49 pieces of personal information, including biometric data like fingerprints, 3D facial recognition, and even iris scans. The cards are voluntary at the moment, but eventually you're going to need a new passport, and that's when the system becomes coercive. To get one, you will have to provide the same 49 pieces of personal data for the National Register, or you're going nowhere. I think it won't be long before shops, bars and offices think they're the best way to establish proof of identity.
I don't mind identifying myself with a passport or a driving license or a simple plastic identifier like this. What I do mind is giving 49 pieces of information about myself to the National Identity Register.
And this database isn't passive. Every time your card is swiped on the terminal linked to the NIR, it will register the details of where it was used. In effect, the database will start tracking your life. And might a future government, under pressure to do something about terrorism, crime or antisocial behaviour, start marking the cards of people they suspect, a kind of electronic black mark. But the government is not stopping with every adult in the United Kingdom. At a cost of over £200 million, it intends to create a database containing the personal details of Britain's 11 million children. Up to 400,000 public sector workers will be able to access personal information about your child. The government claims it will keep our children safe and secure. How is it then that top politicians and celebrities will be allowed to keep their children's names off the database for security reasons. We have a legal right to see our own personal data, but how easy is it to actually do this in practice? Heather has received some early results, and interestingly, the House of Commons had sent us a tape.
So that's a pretty impressive response.
I've never really known anybody to get their own footage. Now, maybe that's because there's going to be a camera crew setting up and they can see that, but nevertheless, yeah, they did deliver the goods on that one.
Yes.
But we also tried the Ministry of Defence and the Football Association. Both of these did not provide us with any footage.
So the other big thing that came through was about Oyster cards.
Yes.
What I thought was most interesting about this, again, is how the police are starting to use the Oyster card database as their new toy. So from August 2004 to March 2006, there was 426 requests by the police to search the database. So that's almost a year and a half, 426 requests. In the last 6 months, the police are making 170 requests per month to access the database.
After this meeting, we received a reply from Transport for London about congestion charge cameras. It said the cameras are not turned off at the weekend because it would be too expensive for someone to go around each camera and flick a switch. So even when the congestion charge is not in force, the cameras are still monitoring traffic. So what is the reason for the surveillance systems that I have seen spreading across Britain? Tony Blair argues that the events of 9/11 have changed the rules of the game forever. That the war on terror is unlike anything leaders of the past have had to deal with, and that new measures are required to fight a new enemy. This justification has been especially effective in the United States. Five years on from 9/11, I decided to return to America to look at what surveillance technologies are being used there, and which ones are coming to the UK.
The amazing thing about the American response to 9/11 was the astonishing staunchness of the New Yorkers particularly, which is where I was. Everyone seeming to know what to do without being told. And then of course, much later on, and then, to my mind it was 10 days, 2 weeks, the shock of what had happened, the shock of this first attack on American soil since Pearl Harbor began to sink in. And I think from that moment on, you see the America that we see today. It was decided then to assert American authority, to make sure that the 21st century was going to belong to America.
In the months after 9/11, when the world was still in shock, significant pieces of anti-terror legislation were passed quickly. They included the Patriot Act, which has dramatically increased the state's powers of mass surveillance. And as President Bush's admission of a controversial phone tapping program showed, his administration has been making legally questionable use of these new powers.
I authorized the National Security Agency to intercept the international communications of people with known links to Al-Qaeda and related terrorist organizations.
But by May 2006, it emerged that not only was the American government listening to international calls, it was also monitoring the domestic phone records of millions of innocent Americans.
One of the astonishing parts of this case is the sheer numbers involved. Since 9/11, the National Security Agency has been analysing without consent the telephone calls of nearly 300 million Americans. That's estimated to be 1.9 trillion calls.
This type of mass surveillance is no longer the stuff of science fiction. The NSA phone tapping case is an example of data mining. A new technique that means the records of your internet searches, your bank transactions, credit card purchases and phone calls can all be searched in seconds for certain patterns of behavior, such as regularly calling the Middle East. The hope is that these patterns will help to identify potential terrorists. But Jay Stanley at the American Civil Liberties Union believes that the technique of data mining is a serious threat to our privacy.
We're living in a world where more and more information and data is created about us, where we pass through sensors or cameras and computers, and we buy things and we enter places and use electronic key cards. And each of those pieces of information might be harmless on its own, that you were at this place at this time. But when you bring each of those pieces of information together, they're like pixels. Yeah. You could form a very high-resolution image of somebody's life to a degree that really is quite spooky. And I think that most people, if they knew the extent of the possibilities in this area, would be quite alarmed.
And it's very difficult to persuade people of the deep and lasting change it's going to bring to their lives. And that's what you do. And how do you do it?
People say, I've never done anything wrong. And my answer to that is, are you sure? There are a lot of laws in the books, a lot of complicated laws in the books, a lot of laws where the prosecutors and the police have a lot of discretion to interpret the laws, and if they decide that you are their enemy, you are public enemy number one, and they have the ability to go through your life with a fine-tooth comb because your privacy has been destroyed, they will find something. Chances are pretty good.
This is the reality of living in the digital age. Almost everything we do leaves an electronic trail.
But just in case you think this cannot happen in the United Kingdom, think again. It's recently been revealed CIA has accessed European bank accounts. SWIFT is the international money transfer system used by 7,500 banks and financial institutions in 200 countries. It processes $6 trillion a day. In June 2006, the New York Times revealed that the CIA had subpoenaed SWIFT for access to their vast number of financial transactions. The paper claimed that the program led to the capture of the mastermind of the 2002 Bali bombing and helped identify a man laundering money for Al-Qaeda. But it also emerged that possibly as many as 20 million British banking transactions were included in the information made available to the US government. However, there's a question that nobody seems to be asking. Does the success rate of these mass surveillance programs justify their existence? Or has the public fear of terrorism been used for political gain? Since 9/11, the Bush administration has brought in blanket surveillance programs. But is this really the best way to deal with the modern threat of terrorism? Al Gore, once Vice President and recently recast as the conscience of liberal America, is now warning of the dangers of this new obsession with surveillance.
The Bush-Cheney administration chose to use the war against terror as a basis for both political argument in a partisan context and for an assault on the individual rights, including the right to privacy, including the right to be free of government eavesdropping. These rights have been weakened now. The use of fear to acquire power has a rather old provenance.
Yes.
Politicians from time immemorial have used that tactic. It's always been effective.
I wonder if you think this blanket surveillance is a good way of tracking.
No, it's not. It's not effective in its own terms. I talked to an FBI expert who put it this way. He said, we're looking for needles in haystacks. Yes. And the Bush-Cheney administration keeps piling more hay on top of the stacks. And the routine mass collection of all of these conversations and communications is not only an invasion of privacy, it's also completely impractical as a way of finding threats to security that are legitimate. They had the names of the hijackers on 9/11. They had their telephone numbers. They were listed in the book under their own names. Two of them were, and yet they had so much hay to sort through. Yes. They ignored those pointed facts and said, "Oh, we need to collect more mass data." It's not the right way to do it.
If I just can ask then, if you feel that in today's climate and with these great terrorist threats, we should change our views of civil liberties.
Well, I don't think so. To use that hypothetical as an excuse for the routine destruction of civil liberties, I think is a serious abuse of democratic traditions.
In Britain, we have now got the legislation to build an ID card. Do you feel that Americans would accept this? What is a very big step for a population to accept?
In the U.S. context, a national ID card has always been resisted, precisely because it has been seen as a very powerful tool which, in the hands of the wrong kind of government, could be a means for abusing all privacy.
Social control, really.
Yes, that's right.
And as we enter an age where total surveillance is now a technical possibility, I think we need to ask if governments should be given these powers. Many of these programs are secret, so it's hard to challenge them. I believe it leaves them open to abuse. And I can already see it happening at America's airports. After 9/11, flying to and in America has become a civil liberties disaster area. In response to the attacks, the US government has compiled so-called no-fly lists, which are supposed to be made up of people with known terrorist associations. There are over 100,000 names on them, and if your name matches, you will either be prevented from flying or made to go through extra security. The US government claims to be using these powers to make it hard for terrorists to operate, but there's growing evidence that it's also making it hard for anyone who dares to question its policies. Jan Adams and Rebecca Gordon are die-hard anti-war activists. They publish an anti-war paper, War Times. They believe that this was enough to put them on a no-fly list. These two middle-aged American women seem to be regarded as a threat to national security.
We went to the airport with a little bit of extra time, as one always does, and got up to the counter, handed in our identification. The woman behind the counter tapped in our names. She got a funny look on her face and she said, "There's something wrong with my computer. I have to call my boss." And she went and made a phone call.
We stood out in the middle of the airport and she came over and said, "I have to stay with you because I've called the police. You're on the FBI no-fly list."
And she said, "I can't imagine why this would be happening to you." And we looked at each other and we thought about the 1,000 copies of War Times that we had in our suitcases. And we said,
maybe.
We said, well, it might have to do with the fact that we publish an anti-war newspaper. And she said, oh, and her eyes got really big. So then the police came. 3 uniformed, armed members of the San Francisco police. And they stood around, basically surrounded us and our luggage in the middle of the airport and radioed in our names to headquarters. And they said, "We have to see if you're on the master list."
Master list?
Okay. Well, about 20 minutes later...
It took about 20 minutes, and they came back, "You're not on the master list." So we're going to have to search you, and they marked up our boarding pass.
With a big red S.
With a big red S, and we had special search for the luggage, and it got run through the bomb stuff.
At the time, the list was secret, but it was recently leaked to the media and contained a number of very bizarre names. Even Senator Edward Kennedy has found himself being stopped at airports. As political activists, Jan and Rebecca, along with the American Civil Liberties Union, took the government to court.
You know, in the end what happened was the judge did award court costs to the American Civil Liberties Union. And
so you had a victory of sorts.
We had a victory.
We had a victory of some nature.
Yeah, I mean, they didn't make the ACLU bear the cost of the case.
Was there any apology made to you?
Oh,
no.
No, I don't think that this administration is sorry.
They don't apologize.
They don't apologize for anything. They're certainly not going to apologize to us.
But despite the fightbacks of the civil liberties movement, it is an unequal contest. They are up against the full force of a determined and well-resourced government. Data mining and no-fly lists are already part of life in America. But what about tomorrow? What surveillance technologies await us in the future? Supermarkets like this one in San Francisco are home to a new breed of 21st century tracking device. RFID, or radio frequency identification chips, are tiny transmitters that can be attached to almost any product and scanned at a distance. Essentially, they're 21st century barcodes. When triggered, they transmit a unique code which can be received up to 10 meters away. They are being used by stores like Walmart as a way to track products around the world. RFID allows a company to know when a product is in the warehouse and when it is bought by a customer and taken home. In theory, you can even track the object after you've bought it. But yet again, I can see these seemingly harmless technologies that are supposed to make life more efficient becoming subject to the laws of function creep. An American company called Verichip has taken this same RFID technology and is implanting the chip in humans. Technology that was brought in to track your Gillette razor can now be used to track and identify humans, and that's about to include me.
So just tell me about this microchip you're going to inject into my arm.
Yes, it's a first and only FDA-approved microchip to implant in humans.
Yes.
It uses RFID, radio frequency identification technology.
Yeah.
But the real purpose of this is it's a link to your personal and medical information on a secure website. So in a case of an emergency, if you were confused, comatose, or otherwise unable to communicate and presented to an emergency room, they would be able to scan you and pick up a unique 16-digit number, which is the only thing that's on this microchip,
yes,
and be able through that to access your medical record.
And what's the red bit?
The red is actually the antenna.
Yeah. Huh?
And if you look right back here, there's a very small microchip, and that's actually has the 16-digit number. If you ever decided to have it removed, it can be removed. It's a simple procedure to remove it.
It's like my barcode.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So if you're ready,
I'm ready.
Just relax your
Does this hurt?
It should not hurt at all. Okay, just relax.
Mm-hmm.
We are all done. I'm just going to now just double check and make sure it's working before I let you out of here. And you heard the beep.
I recognize the last
the
few
same
digits.
number.
Yes, well I don't recognize the whole number, but the last 4 digits are right. Yes.
Right, and that's the same number that we have on here, which is the same number that we put in.
So that's me.
That's you now. Here actually corresponds to this number. Right.
Verichip has huge ambitions for their product, which was originally designed to tag pets. The CEO of Verichip recently promoted the idea that all migrant workers be chipped, and it has also been suggested that the entire US military receive implants. Verichips have already been implanted in several patients with degenerative brain conditions such as Alzheimer's, so they can be identified in a medical emergency. But the Verichip is old technology. The new generation of RFID chips will do much more than just transmit a code. Many states in America are considering putting them in driving licenses. They will be able to transmit all your personal details when they come within range of an RFID reader. The scheme is aimed at making the license harder to forge and more convenient for the police. BTN works for the Electronic Frontier Foundation, an organization promoting personal privacy in the digital age.
These IDs are not just trackable in the sense that they have a unique ID number. They will broadcast your name, your date of birth, your country of nationality, etc., etc. And if you're a parent and you have children who are about to carry a driver's license, what do you want strangers to be able to know? I've got a daughter, she's 15. In a year, she's going to have a driver's license. Do I want her to be carrying a driver's license to broadcast her name, her dress, height, weight, eye color to anyone who's got a compatible reader? I don't think so. So one of the major issues that we've got is trying to keep personal information off of RFID cards and making sure that people really do understand that there's significant risk associated with that.
People's faith in this one tiny piece of technology, the RFID chip, is amazing. And it's not just being used here in America. The application of RFID is expanding rapidly, and it is already being used in the United Kingdom. All new British passports are already being issued with RFID chips. The forthcoming ID card will also contain similar technology. But are the technologies themselves secure? Back home, I'm due for an encounter with someone who is convinced he can prove they are anything but. We are constantly told that modern surveillance technologies are for our own safety, that CCTV protects us from crime, and that the new RFID passports will help fight terrorism. Many of you may still think they're a good thing, but have politicians overestimated the security of the technologies themselves? It's something we were about to put to the test. While I have been filming this program, I know I have been watched. 2 hours outside London is an old nuclear bunker, now used as a highly secure facility where companies protect and store private data. It is here that I was about to find out just how secure the technologies that track us really are. The first thing I saw as I entered the bunker was a monitor playing CCTV footage of me walking down a street in London. And deeper inside the complex, loudspeakers started playing a recording of my voice. But the man who started the company based here has promised to explain everything. Adam Laurie is a security consultant who exposes weaknesses in high-tech systems. And while I have been investigating technology, it seems technology has been investigating me.
Okay, so you probably recognise the voices. That's you having a meeting with Heather Brooke.
He had somehow managed to make Heather's mobile bug one of our meetings.
So we were bugged.
So basically, yeah, the phone not only bugged you, it was also a tracking device to find out where you were in the first place.
Without me knowing, Adam had signed Heather up with a perfectly legal company which offers to pinpoint the location of any phone registered with it. He then used a Bluetooth communication facility on her phone to listen to our meeting.
So I was able to bring up a map showing where that phone was, drive to the general area, scan the area for the Bluetooth. Once I found it, I then, I had a visual on you guys, so I saw you sitting there. I was in a cafe round the corner, initiated the connection, told the phone to ring me, and then recorded the conversation.
When a congestion charge is not in operation.
These.
And how did you acquire these?
Adam had also accessed CCTV cameras that were filming me on the streets of Soho. They transmit on a wavelength that is surprisingly easy to intercept, and so allow the images to be captured.
You were going to be going to this meeting in Soho, so I scouted the area beforehand with a simple handheld scanner and was able to record images from cameras pointing out on the street and capture you on your way to the meeting. Now, I mean, that's relatively harmless, they're just street cameras, but the same technology is used inside buildings for security, and actually they're making the place less secure because they're broadcasting it to the world. So.
I normally work at home and now have a wireless internet system, but apparently this can make my personal emails and internet searches available to whoever wants to see them.
Okay, so what's this here you got here?
Okay, well, you should be able to recognise that. That's an email from you. And basically, I came to your house, sat outside, scanned the street for Wi-Fi networks, found your network, and then intercepted you sending that mail.
Right. So anyone could do that?
Anyone could have done it, absolutely.
So you can use my phone to record conversations and track me. Use other people's cameras to take pictures of me. Snitch my email by sitting outside in the van with a bit of equipment. What else can you do?
One other thing I heard that you've actually had a chip implanted in your arm.
I have.
See if I can read it. Do you know where it is?
Yes, I know it's here.
Okay. So that should be your ID number.
Yes, I remember the last 4 digits.
So that can be read with an off-the-shelf commercial scanner. Now I've done that and I know your number. I have some blank chips which I bought over the internet. So is that what your chip looks like?
That's exactly what it looks like.
Right, so there's no reason I can't now program that number into that chip.
Right. So
have that implanted in my arm, and then I'm you.
Then you're me.
Yeah.
Even the chip in my arm, promoted as a secure means of determining identity, could be cloned. But Adam's most staggering revelation concerned a piece of technology that almost each and every one of us will soon be carrying.
I know you've been looking at the new passports and ID cards and so on, and that's a concern for me as well. I mean, here's a new passport, and this has a chip in it.
That's a chip, is it?
That's the actual chip that will have your data stored on it.
Yeah.
And my concern is, the privacy of that data. So I was curious what was actually stored on there. So I've written some software that will actually try and read it.
Can you do that?
So yeah, what I'm going to do now is read this one. This is my son's passport.
And after just a few seconds, all the personal details stored on the passport came up on the screen. Adam had cracked the new RFID passport, introduced for its supposed security. And this, remember, is the technology that will be used in the ID card.
Okay, so this is the data that's stored in the passport. So we've got his name, full name, date of birth, nationality, and so on.
So can anyone pick up this passport and read it from a scanner, or do they need something else?
It's slightly more complex than that. You actually need a key. You need a cryptographic key to be able to read it, but the key is derived from information that's fairly easy to get hold of. So it's basically passport number, date of birth, and expiry date of the passport.
And they're all jumbled up together, are they?
They're jumbled up in a particular way, which is a published algorithm. So, I downloaded from the internet exactly how I jumble them up. Once you have that information, you can log into the passport and you can read it.
It's unbelievable.
We asked the Home Office to respond to our findings. They said, the chip is one part of the security features used in the e-passport, but being able to copy this does not mean that the passport can be forged or imitated for illegal or unauthorized use. But the fact that we have been able to read secure data from the passport without opening it is still of enormous concern. These passports have only been out a few months, and my fear is that one day someone will be able to clone them. As it is, I don't feel they are keeping my personal information safe. And it's not just passports that have RFID. The new ID cards being introduced in 2009 will also have a similar chip.
If you have very much the same technology on this as you've got in your passport, any old fool, or anyone with a bit of know-how...
Well, once the tools are out there, anyone who gets their hands on the tools, I had to write my own because the software isn't generally available, but, once the things are in circulation, it's all public domain stuff.
The irony of all this is that criminals and terrorists, the very people these technologies are supposed to stop, will find and exploit weaknesses in the system. Terrorists won't be carrying their ID cards, they'll be carrying yours. Adam has shown me fatal flaws in some of the technologies being used in the surveillance age. But despite this, their use continues to grow.
So what should we do about it? I think there should be a national debate about the amount of surveillance in our society. I think we should take control of our futures rather than just letting it happen.
We are already at a stage where mass surveillance of populations is a reality, reducing each one of us to the status of suspect. But the issue is not just about privacy. As we have seen, the lack of security in these new systems puts us all at risk from the very people they seek to protect us from.
A terrifying picture is taking shape in my mind of the total surveillance society. Is this really what we want for ourselves?
Drama next. Looks like Melissa might be getting some action in 30-something.